Now, he's a pathologist. He made a statement the other day. He said, the president is showing great leadership on behalf of the American people during his illness as part of the worst pandemic in a century. Throughout the course of the epidemic, many in the news media have exaggerated the risk of serious illness like body bags and cul-de-sacs, you're all going to die. And that's not happened. And he's joining us now. Dr. Roger Klein, good to have you back, sir.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's always good to have you, Doc. You know that. We get along great. So, look, I read your statement. I'm like, all right, I got to get the Doc on. And basically, I'm going to let you elaborate, but just sum it up. You said, look, the president proved to everybody you can test positive, you can have a sniffle, you take the right therapeutics, you're going to be fine. That's basically what your message is, right?
Well, I think that, I think in essence, what we're seeing now is a bunch of people in the president's orbit who are testing positive. Most of these people, if the president hadn't been positive, probably wouldn't have gotten tested, if they didn't work for the White House. And they would go on with their lives and they wouldn't even know they had it. I think it's really important to understand. There's no question it's serious. We have to take it seriously. And some people, rare people, based on numbers, can even die from it. Most of those are elderly and sick. And every death is a tragedy. But what we have to understand is that the individual risk for most people from this virus is very low, and it's quite contagious. And what we should take away from the lesson is that despite all the protocols, the president himself got it. So I think we need to understand that many, many people are going to get this. Most won't get seriously ill. We need to protect the most vulnerable people, and we need to go on with our lives in a cautious way.
So let me ask you something, Dr. Klein. Why is it news when people test positive? I'm trying to figure this out now, right? Like I live in Virginia, and there was a councilman that tested positive, a city councilman in Virginia Beach. I don't even live in Virginia Beach, and I get a thing comes over my phone, Councilman John Moss tests positive. Why is that news? Why is it coming over my app? Stephen Miller tests positive. Kelly McEnany tests positive. I can't get those. Those are high-profile figures. But John happens to be a friend of mine. I hope he's okay. But, why is that news? Who's your PR guy, right? Marcus? I got to get a news flash that says Marcus Swedstafosky tests positive? Why is that news?
No, you're 100% right.
Come on, Doc.
It's terrible. What they have done to this country and the fear that they have engendered is so wrong. And you're hitting on it exactly. What they should do is they should take all of the 50 or 70 million people who have had this infection and had no serious consequences and parade them out one after the next serially for the next 30 days. This is really, it's very wrong. They're giving the wrong impression. It's really quite foolish because there's something in a medical journal, an online medical journal that I thought, and they listed the celebrities who had tested positive, and there were, 50 people on there, none of whom was seriously ill. I think, or maybe one, right? Maybe Herman Cain was on there and was seriously ill. But I think we need to understand that they're telling us a wrong story here.
Well, exactly. I just had Congressman Morgan Griffith on. He had it. He recovered, stayed home for a couple of days, recovered. My wife had it. She was actually sick with it. She was actually in bed 3 days. She was tired and, got a lot of sleep and lost her taste and couldn't smell. And, she went through it 3 days. On day number 4, and she didn't get any of the therapeutics because that was very early on. We didn't really know what it was. She popped out of bed on day number 4, and that was the end of it. Never to be seen or heard again. It just went. After 3 days, it was gone. It goes on and on and on. You got millions of people that test positive. They're fine. All right, the Tennessee Titans. I'm a Titans fan, right? Big Titans fan. Football team. 7 players test positive. Big, young, strapping men, right? Offensive line. 5 guys in the offensive line test positive. They average about 320 pounds, right? Well, next week they're playing football. So they took a week off and they ate chicken soup and now they're back. There's no body bags on cul-de-sacs. The Tennessee Titans football team is not dead. So it's what? Okay, I get the fact that you canceled the game. I get it. That makes it. I'm all for that. The Florida Marlins, half the team got it And now they're in the playoffs and could go to the World Series. Nobody's dead there. I mean, it's outrageous to me.
No, you're right, and you know what it is. And I'm not a conspiracy kind of guy, but I really think it feeds into the false notion that we have more control over this than we do, and quite frankly, we need to be honest with ourselves, and the ability to contain or control this epidemic is limited. It's here with us. We need to learn to live with it. We certainly can protect nursing homes. There are things you can do in a confined setting like that. And people who don't want to get sick, and I would never advocate anybody trying to get this. It can be very serious even for a young person, but that would be extremely rare. They need to stay away from other people. That's the best way to do it. And I think that it just feeds into the whole notion. And I don't want to say it, but that somebody did something wrong, and we really could have contained it and controlled it if we just acted differently earlier. These sorts of nonsensical stories that just don't bear out. It's all over the world, and they clamp people down the minute they let them up. They get a resurgence. It just doesn't. These methods don't work. It's very contagious. You can't stop the flu like this. It's probably 2 or 3 times more contagious than the flu. So I think we need to be realistic.
You know what? It's like trying to stop mosquitoes with a chain link fence. I mean, you simply can't do it. And but what is amazing to me is the way the media stokes this and the fear that is in people. And they say, go by science and the numbers. You go by science and the numbers, and there's not body bags in cul-de-sacs. There's not hospitals being overrun. There's not this huge death rate that everybody said we were going to have. There's not a run on ventilators. There's none of that. In fact, I was on TV with somebody the other day, and he said, the biggest problem that the Trump administration had in mismanaging this is, they didn't provide everybody with a mask. And I'm like, and I said to the guy right on TV, I'm like, are you serious? What store have you been into in the last, 90 days? What environment have you been into where if you didn't have a mask, they had one readily available? CVS, Kroger, store, gas station, hot dog stand. I mean, what do you mean there's no availability of masks? I mean, come on. It's just this fear-mongering. And let me ask you this. When does this go away? November 5 after the election? When does it end?
Yeah, so that's what, and we've talked about this before, that's the scary part. I mean, you'd think, well, maybe that'll happen, and then all of a sudden everything will look bright, and they'll try to make, if for example, Biden were to win, they would try to make everything look good. But I do fear that this is all taking away people's rights as a form of subjugation. They're using fear in order to manipulate us to take away our freedoms. And the problem is, and the concern is that these governments, these politicians, especially those on the left, are not going to relinquish that power. We see it with governors who keep getting overturned in courts. It's it's a very, very worrisome trend. And what's the next crisis going to be?
It's a very worrisome trend is the prophetic words here, because aren't you shocked at how little resistance there's been with Americans to giving up their freedom and rights?
I am, but they're frightened, and particularly there's certain groups, seniors, for example, and that's one of the great things about President Trump. The guy's 74 years old, a little bit heavy, so he's a healthy guy, but a little bit overweight. And look how he got through this thing. And look, he's not out of the woods yet, and you can hear they're watching him minute by minute on television, just waiting for that crash. But the typical situation is what he's experiencing, even for a 74-year-old.
We're with Dr. Roger Klein. He's a pathologist, and he's got a long history. He's got a long resume of all kinds of stuff that I'm not going to read now. I've read it before, but let's just suffice to say he's an expert in this area. So, Dr. Klein, the other thing that's driving me bananas is hotspot. What the hell is a hotspot? Like, I keep hearing that two words that are driving me bananas are systemic. I think if I had a dime for every time somebody said systemic on TV in the past 6 months, I'd have $1 bajillion. And now it's hotspot. Oh, there's a hotspot in such and such a town, and there's a hotspot in Jacksonville, and there's a hotspot in Cheyenne, Wyoming. What is a hotspot?
Well, sometimes it's a prison. Where everybody's living in very close quarters, and they can't keep them apart. So I'm not kidding. I mean, sometimes that is what you'll see these large numbers of cases in a certain area, and it turns out that they have a prison there, and everybody got infected. But I think this has so much to do with the natural progression of an epidemic and then testing. When you're looking, because again, at the Marion Correctional Institute in Ohio early on in the spring, and I talked about this, 2,500 prisoners were tested. 80% were positive right away, and 95% didn't even know they had it.
And no one died.
They had a few, like 13 deaths out of maybe 2,200, I think, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was very, and these are all men, so higher risk, older, sicker, lower cared for people than the general population. And so, that translates into what we're seeing right now. Iceland just came out with an estimated infection fatality rate where, the number of people who die per infection of 0.3%. And so that's 3 out of 1,000, which a lot of us have been saying probably 1 to 4 out of 1,000. Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, Oxford, has said that for the whole, almost the duration. And that's about, that's more than a seasonal flu for sure, but not anything approaching what people were saying initially.
So Iceland's got 3 out of 1,000 infected, and then if you further look at the numbers and you say, okay, how many of those were over 85, right? It's about half. So then it gets down, because again, when you're over 85, your chances of dying go up. Sorry, I mean that's what's going to happen to all of us. So, but over 85, you cut that in half, and now you're getting to under 2 per 1,000, which is kind of flu-like. The fear that has been that the media continues to stoke is incredible. I'm shocked at the level of non-resistance of Americans in just letting these governors take their rights away, and they're fine with it. But look, if you study history, remember when Hitler became chancellor, he burned the Bundestag down, blamed the communists, and said, give me full powers for 6 months so I can keep you safe. And you know what happened after that. So these things have gone on in history, but it's just sad that we're living in such fear. And I loved what the president said, Dr. Klein. I want to get your reaction when the president said, you know what? You have to go out and live your life. You can't live in fear. You have to go live. And then the media then mocked that he was putting people at risk. So you're supposed to do what? Not live?
Yeah, so I agree completely with the president. We've been saying this for months, and I think it's actually it's exactly right. We've never done this before, where we shut our lives down because of an infection. Even the Spanish flu, that was much worse for the population than this. They never did that. We've had Asian flu. We lived with polio and measles. People didn't stop their lives, and I think, I'm not sure what it is about our folks now. I think it's probably the 24-hour news cycle, especially on cable, where for weeks and maybe months they post every single death from this, and people got unduly frightened, and it's a setup for manipulation. Unfortunately, that's what's happening. People really ought to read that. And I'll get a little political here, but people ought to read that Biden Sanders Unity Task Force recommendations. That's really his personal platform, and they ought to read the Democratic Party platform before this election. And I think they'll be scared out of their wits, and people really need to not be manipulated into voting out somebody because they believe that he didn't protect them enough from a virus that is really a natural occurrence and something that we just can't control or contain. And the president's actually done a fantastic job. I mean, I think the administration, a couple of things, Operation Warp Speed, this idea of compressing a vaccine time from 10 years to less than a year maybe. It's just phenomenal. It's a great accomplishment. Testing, I mean, a new disease test. We're doing over 110 million tests. In 2017, 2018, a really bad flu epidemic. People were being treated outside in tents. We tested 35 to 40 million people. That's all. We're doing many more with a new disease. Didn't even have one test for it. FDA put through over 250 emergency use authorizations. We've got new medicines. And the president's been driving everything. Keeping the schools open. Democrats would lock us down, shut our schools, shut down the economy. And the president has been pushing in the other direction. Those states that have gone ahead and opened up their economies, been safe, tried to balance these different considerations, are doing better on a death per million basis. They're doing better with the coronavirus, but they have way better unemployment. I mean, their economies are performing much better. This is what we need to do, and we do need a leader like President Trump who can put us, who can take us through. This requires real leadership. You can't run from it.
Dr. Roger Klein, I want to thank you for being with us today, and thank you for that passionate plea. And I know the president's doing all he can, but you're right. You look at these southern states, and I was telling somebody this earlier today. My wife and 16-year-old spent 2 weeks, this past 2 weeks in Florida. He's was at a 2-week high school baseball tournament on two ends of the state. And she said, we live in Virginia, and she said going to Florida was like going into into the past, like where everything was normal. People shop, there's no masks, they go to football games. The Florida Gators game had 25,000 people. Everybody just living, fun, having fun, going out, and no body bags in cul-de-sacs. And their unemployment is 6%. Yet you get back to, you're driving through North Carolina, and, I have to stop pumping gas because I don't have a mask on, and there was no one there. I mean, it's unbelievable, state to state. Dr. Klein, thank you for being with us. John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth.
Thank you.